He walked in with a cracked old phone and no one cared. They laughed, ignored him, treated him like nothing. But when he came back in a suit, they realized he owned the place. The glass door slid open with a gentle chime as the man stepped inside. He was in his late 50s. His jacket was creased from age, not style. His jeans were faded, and his shoes, while clean, had long lost their original shine. Most noticeably, in his hand was a scuffed-up smartphone, a model at least 8 years old. Its screen was cracked at the corner, and he held it gently like someone handling an old photograph. Inside the bright, modern service center of Bluecom Mobile, everything gleamed: the marble tiles, the digital cue screen, and the employees in blue-collared polos that looked fresh out of a branding photo shoot. The place was filled with clean lines, soft lighting, and the low buzz of polite customer interaction. The man walked to the front desk and waited. And waited. 2 young receptionists were chatting behind the counter. One of them, a slim man with neatly styled hair and a smartwatch, gave the newcomer a cursory glance, then went back to laughing at something on his phone. The man cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me," he said. "My phone isn't charging properly anymore. I was hoping someone could..." Before he could finish, the receptionist raised a finger. "Yeah, just take a number," he said, not looking up. "Well, call you." The man looked around. There was a digital kiosk near the door with a glowing touchscreen. I wasn't sure if I needed to use that first," he said quietly. The second receptionist, a young woman with long nails and AirPods in one ear, muttered under her breath. "Seriously, dude, 2015 called. It wants its phone back." They snickered. The man pretended not to hear. He touched the kiosk screen and printed his ticket, A217. There were 10 people ahead of him. Chat. He took a seat in the waiting area, an L-shaped bench with synthetic leather cushions. Next to him, a boy was playing with a tablet, his mother scrolling through Instagram. Across the room, a teenager was loudly describing to a friend how his new phone had died after just 2 days. The man sat patiently. He wasn't in a rush. He just stared at the service counter as customers came and went. He observed every interaction, how employees smiled or didn't, how they handled complaints, how often they excused themselves for company policy. At one point, the receptionist who had mocked him earlier walked out from behind the desk and passed him without acknowledgement. The man's eyes followed him, not with judgment, but with quiet calculation. 25 minutes passed. His number was finally called. He stood and walked to the counter, where a new employee, a trainee, judging by the badge, waited. "Hi, sir. I'm Jake. What seems to be the issue?" The man smiled warmly. "Thanks, Jake. My phone isn't charging properly. I've tried different cables, but the port seems loose." Jake examined the phone gently. "Yeah, this model's pretty old. Honestly, we don't stock parts for it anymore." "That's all right. I don't mind if it takes a few days to order something in." Jake hesitated. "We usually don't work on phones this old, but I can ask the supervisor," before the man could thank him. The original receptionist, the one with the smug smile, walked over. "No need. Jake," he interrupted. "We don't touch museum pieces. Tell him we can give him a trade-in discount on a real phone." Jake looked uncomfortable. "It's fine," the man said softly. "Thank you for your time." He took his old phone, nodded respectfully to Jake, and turned to leave. The smug receptionist called out behind him, loud enough for others to hear. "Hey, sir, next time, Maybe come back with something that still exists in this decade. The waiting room chuckled. The man didn't look back, but he smiled. Outside, he stood still for a moment, looked up at the bold sign above the center Bluecom. The logo was sleek, modern, clean. He pulled out a smaller phone, this one even older, a flip phone, and pressed one button. "Alex," he said after a few seconds, "I want full footage of the 3rd Avenue branch. From the front desk, today, between 10 and 11 a.m.? He paused. "Yes, every mic on, I'll meet you at HQ at 3. He hung up. And for the first time all morning, he chuckled quietly at exactly 3:05 p.m. that same day. The elevators at Bluecom's headquarters chimed on the executive floor. A tall man in a gray suit stepped out, followed closely by 2 assistants holding tablets. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the entourage, it was the man walking ahead of them, dressed now in a pressed dark blazer, slacks, and polished shoes. It was the same man who had entered the repair center hours ago, the one with the old phone. But this time, no one dared ignore him. He walked with the air of someone who knew the weight of the walls around him, someone who'd helped lay their foundation. His name was Daniel Tran, and he wasn't just the CEO. He was the founder of Bluecom. Inside the boardroom, the blinds were drawn. A screen lit up the far wall, split into 4 quadrants, each showing security footage from different angles inside the 3rd Avenue Service Center. One showed the front desk, another showed the waiting room, another audio logs, and the last one, a zoomed-in shot of the man himself sitting silently observing. Daniel stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "Play the recording," he said. The room went silent except for the tinny sound of the receptionist's voice. "Yeah, just take a number. Seriously, dude, 2015 called. It wants its phone back. Laughter, more clips, more disrespect, more missed chances to simply be decent." Then Jake's voice came through. The trainee, polite, unsure, but kind. Daniel nodded slightly at that. When the footage ended, one of the board members cleared his throat. "Daniel, this isn't the first complaint we've gotten from that branch." "No," Daniel said, "but it's the first time we caught it on every angle." He turned to Alex, his head of operations. "Make sure the recordings are sent to the training division and HR. I want a full cultural review of that branch. Effective immediately." "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, back at the 3rd Avenue Service Center, the atmosphere was unchanged. Tom, the arrogant receptionist, was joking about a TikTok video he was planning to post later. I swear, man, this guy today had a phone that still had a physical button. I thought he was going to pull out a pager. He laughed. So did Sandra. Only Jake seemed quieter than usual. He glanced toward the door. For some reason, he felt like something had shifted, and it had. At 10:00 a.m. the next morning, the store manager received a calendar invite with the subject line, "Executive Visit Confidential Audit." It was scheduled for 1:00 p.m. The manager, Greg, nearly dropped his phone. Executive audits were rare. Confidential ones unheard of. He scrambled to clean the counters, reorganize displays, and reassign tasks. Jake was told to handle front desk today, "Because you're the least likely to mess up," Greg said, half joking. Tom and Sandra exchanged glances. By 12:45 p.m., nerves were high. The entire team stood a little straighter, laughed a little less, monitored every word they said. At 12:59 p.m., the doors slid open, and in walked Daniel Tran. Same eyes, different presence, no longer a quiet man with a broken phone. Now, the man whose signature appeared on their paychecks. The air thinned instantly. Greg rushed forward, nearly stumbling over himself. "Mr. Transer! What an honor. We didn't know you were coming personally." Daniel held up a hand. Calm, controlled. "I'm not here for a tour," he said. "I'm here because of how I was treated yesterday." Greg's mouth opened, but no words came. Daniel turned to face the team. His eyes landed on Tom. Tom paled. Sandra looked away. Only Jake met his gaze. Nervously, respectfully. Daniel nodded. "Let me tell you a story," he said, walking slowly through the room. "Once upon a time, there was a company that started in a garage. 2 people, a whiteboard, and a dream to make mobile technology more human. We built our first store with our own hands. I used to fix phones myself while sweeping the floors." He paused. "I never stopped believing in what we built. But over the years, what I did stop believing in was that our service still had a soul." He turned sharply. "Until yesterday, when I came in here with a broken phone, and got a far worse experience than a broken device deserves. No one moved." Daniel gestured toward Jake. "Except for this one. Jake, is it? You showed basic decency. You spoke like a human being." Jake blinked. "I thank you." "Sir," Daniel looked at Greg. "Manager Greg, you'll receive HR documentation this afternoon. I expect a full report on retraining plans by the end of the week." He paused. "Tom, Sandra, you're being placed under review, effective immediately." Greg turned pale. Tom muttered, "Sir, we didn't know it was you." Daniel turned slowly. "That's the problem," he said, voice like stone. "You only offer respect when you think it's someone important. What if it'd just been an old man with a bad phone?" "Silence." He nodded once to Jake and walked out. When Daniel Tran stepped back into his private car, he didn't look angry. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from work, but the kind that comes from disappointment. Because no matter how much a company grows, he had always believed its heart should grow with it. But that belief had just been tested. "Home, sir?" his driver asked. "No," Daniel replied. "Headquarters. There's one more thing I need to handle." He sat back, scrolling through notes on his table, employee files, training history, even past customer complaints. The 3rd Avenue branch had been underperforming quietly for a year, but numbers weren't the issue. Culture was. Back at the store, the silence was deafening. Tom stood frozen. His face had turned pale, and his usual smugness had drained completely. Sandra kept rubbing her palms against her thighs, nervously checking her reflection in the blank phone screen. Jake had quietly gone back to the front desk. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't smug. He just looked thoughtful. Manager Greg pulled Tom and Sandra into the stockroom. "What the hell were you 2 thinking?" he hissed. "Mocking someone for their phone." "Really?" Tom muttered. "We didn't know he was the CEO." "That doesn't matter," Greg snapped. "He could have been anyone. You don't treat people like that." Sandra said nothing, just stared at the floor. Over the next hour, HR emails began arriving. Jake received a message first. "Thank you for your professionalism. You'll be contacted regarding a training mentorship program." His eyes widened. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was opportunity. Tom and Sandra, on the other hand, Both received messages marked urgent. They were to report to HQ the next morning for disciplinary meetings. Tom threw his tablet down. "This is ridiculous. It was just a joke." "No," Jake said softly from behind the counter. "It wasn't." That night, Daniel sat in his private office, reviewing everything. He stared at a photo on his desk, a much younger him, and his late co-founder, Lin Pham. Both were smiling, sitting on the floor of their first shop, surrounded by used phone parts and takeout containers. She had died 3 years earlier, but he still remembered her last words before passing Bluecom fully to him. "Promise me we won't lose what made this place special. Daniel, we built it to serve people, not status. And now it seemed that promise was at risk."
What?
The next morning, Tom and Sandra arrived at headquarters, both dressed to impress, but their anxiety was obvious. They were guided into a conference room by an HR officer. Inside, to their surprise, was Daniel. Seated calmly, no assistant, no entourage. He gestured for them to sit. For a moment, he said nothing. Just looked at them, then, finally, "Why do you think you're here?" Tom tried to regain his confidence. "Sir, I'd like to apologize. If I had known who you were, I would never." "That's exactly the problem." Daniel interrupted, softly but firmly. He leaned forward. "You thought I was just an old man with an old phone, and that made me disposable. That says something about your character, not your customer service." Sandra spoke, her voice low. It was thoughtless. "I regret it. I don't need regret." Daniel said, "I need reflection and correction." He stood and walked toward the window. "I came to that branch unannounced because I've been getting reports. That location wasn't just inefficient. It was unfriendly, cold, uncaring. I didn't want a formal inspection. I wanted to feel what a customer feels." He turned back to them, and I did. He paused for a long time before continuing. "I'm not firing either of you." Both looked up, surprised. "But," he added, "you will be transferred to our customer recovery unit, the hardest department we have. You'll deal with angry clients, broken devices, lost data, for the next 3 months. That will be your world." Sandra blinked. "Is that a punishment?" "No." Daniel said, "It's a chance to relearn what this business is actually about." He walked to the door, then turned one last time. "If, after that, you still don't understand why that old phone mattered, you won't need to come back."
Chatterdossum.
Meanwhile, back at the 3rd Avenue branch, Jake received another email. "Congratulations. You've been selected for fast-track leadership training. Your next assignment, shadowing our regional manager for 1 month." He stared at the screen, stunned. He had only been with Bluecom for 6 weeks. Greg clapped him on the shoulder. "You earned it, kid," he said. "One day, this might be your store." Jake smiled, still in disbelief. But deep down, he knew why. He hadn't been extraordinary. He hadn't made a sale or solved a miracle. He had just been kind. And in a world that moved too fast, that had been enough. That afternoon, Daniel walked quietly through the main repair warehouse, watching junior techs work, greeting older employees by name, stopping once to help someone adjust a screen calibration. No cameras, no press. Just a man trying to fix a company the way he had once fixed broken phones, piece by piece. Tom had never hated Mondays as much as this one. He walked into the customer recovery unit, a gray-walled office in the basement of Bluecom HQ without windows, with barely enough space for 2 desks and 4 chairs. On the wall was a whiteboard filled with names, tickets, and red exclamation marks. It felt more like a battlefield than a tech company. Sandra arrived 5 minutes later. Neither of them spoke. Their new supervisor, a woman in her 50s named Marta, didn't waste time. "This isn't customer service," she said coldly. "This is damage control. People who walk through those doors are either furious, desperate, or both. And you're not here to defend the company. You're here to fix what went wrong." Tom raised a hand. "What kind of cases are we handling?" Marta tossed a folder onto his desk. That one was told he'd get his data recovered. "We lost it." That one paid for express service and waited 6 weeks. That one had his entire business shut down for 2 days because of a SIM card failure. Sandra opened her file. The first case read, "Client lost irreplaceable family photos during service." Marta continued, "Your job is not to explain. It's not to blame. It's to take responsibility and rebuild trust, if you can." She gave them both an icy smile. "Let's see how kind you are when kindness won't make the customer like you." The first week was a disaster. Tom tried to fake cheerfulness, but clients saw through it. One woman threw her broken charger on the counter and shouted, "I waited 2 weeks for you to call me back." Tom muttered, "That's not my fault." "No, but you're wearing the shirt," she snapped. He was stunned. Sandra didn't fare much better. She tried being apologetic. But when one client broke into tears over lost voice messages from her late father, Sandra froze. "I'm sorry," she said, but the words felt hollow, worthless. Marta watched from her desk without a word. By the second week, the weight started sinking in. Tom stopped cracking jokes. Sandra began writing personal notes to clients after every Kalivan when she knew they might never read them. They stayed late. They skipped lunch. Not because they had to, but because for the first time they felt responsible. Tom stared at his reflection in the break room window one evening. He looked exhausted. His perfectly styled hair now fell loosely over his forehead. The usual sarcasm in his eyes was replaced with something else. Regret. "I didn't get it," he said quietly to Sandra. "When Mr. Tran walked in that day, I thought he was nobody. But after 2 weeks here, I think he was the only one who really understood what this job means." Sandra nodded. "I used to think customer service was just about smiling," she said. "Now I realize it's about showing up, even when it's hard." One Friday afternoon, Marta handed each of them a sealed envelope. "Read it. Don't talk to me until you do," she said bluntly. They sat side by side, opened the letters. Inside was a simple handwritten message from Daniel Tran. "When people are angry, it's often because they were hurt first. You're not just fixing phones. You're rebuilding people's trust in people. D.T." For the first time, Tom felt something deep in his chest shift. This wasn't punishment. It was correction. This was the real training. The following Monday, Marta gathered them both in front of the whiteboard. There were 3 names circled in green. These clients called back. She said, "They said they felt heard, not fixed heard. That's what matters." She looked at Tom. "You handled 2 of them." He blinked. "I did. You listened. You didn't defend the company. You let them speak, That's more than most do, Sandra asked. What happens now? Marta smiled. For the first time. You've earned a meeting. The next day, both were told to report to the top floor at 10:00 a.m. They wore plain clothes, not polished, not flashy, just real. When the elevator opened, they stepped into the same boardroom where Daniel had watched their footage weeks earlier. He was already seated. No assistants, no cameras, just Daniel. And 2 cups of tea on the table. Sit, he said warmly. They did. Daniel studied them for a long moment. I've read your logs, listened to your calls. I've even spoken to a few of the customers you helped. Tom cleared his throat, unsure what to say. Daniel looked at him. You changed. That matters. He turned to Sandra. You started hearing what people weren't saying. That matters more. They both nodded. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair. I built this company fixing broken phones. But somewhere along the way, people stopped caring about the person holding the phone. That's why I came back to find out if anyone here still did. Tom swallowed hard. I didn't. But I do now, Sandra added. We both do. Daniel nodded slowly. Good, he said, because I have one more request. Daniel sat still for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished oak table between them. I want the 2 of you to visit a branch, he said, not as trainees, not as staff. Tom and Sandra exchanged a glance. You'll be going in anonymously. Daniel continued. As customers, one of our busiest stores in the city, 5th and Main. Why, Sandra asked softly. Because I want you to experience what I did, Daniel said. But more importantly, I want you to see how it feels to be invisible. Again.
Chapter.
The next morning, Tom and Sandra dressed down, jeans, simple shirts, old phones in their pockets. They agreed not to reveal who they were, not even if asked directly. When they entered the store, it was busy, loud. A dozen customers waited. Staff buzzed around like bees, heads down, barely acknowledging anyone. They waited 20 minutes before anyone spoke to them. Even then, the greeting was cold, rushed. Tom noticed a couple next to him struggling with a broken phone. No one offered help. Sandra caught the eye of a woman at the front desk who rolled her eyes before finally calling out. Next, they went through the motions, submitting fake service requests, asking polite questions, receiving impatient responses. By the end of the visit, both walked out in silence. It wasn't until they reached the sidewalk that Sandra spoke. I felt like I didn't matter. Tom nodded. Same. Like they just wanted me to leave. They stood for a moment as the city moved around them. Cars passed. People talked. But inside them, something had shifted permanently. They had just experienced the same disregard they had once handed out so easily. 2 days later, they were back in the boardroom with Daniel. So, he asked. What did you learn? Sandra answered first. That respect isn't just a policy, it's a presence. Tom followed. And that ignoring someone's value doesn't mean they don't have it, it just means you missed it. Daniel smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just a quiet nod of affirmation. He opened a drawer and handed each of them a small envelope. Inside, a letter of promotion. Tom would become training supervisor for new hires across multiple stores. Sandra would join the Customer Experience Task Force, a new division focused on restoring real human connection. Both were stunned. I don't think we deserve this yet, Tom said honestly. Daniel replied, "Exactly. That's why you're ready." Before they left, Daniel said one final thing. People often say leadership is about results. I disagree. It's about reminders. He stood up and walked toward the window. Every person who walks into our stores deserves to be reminded that they matter, even if their phone is old, even if they don't look like they belong, because we don't just fix devices. He turned, eyes sharp yet kind. We fix trust. That evening, Tom walked past a bus stop on his way home. An older man was sitting alone, struggling with a cracked phone. Tom stopped. "Hey," he said, "mind if I take a look?" The man looked up, surprised. "You know phones a little." Tom smiled. They sat side by side in the fading sunlight, two strangers sharing a quiet connection. No name tags, no roles, just one person helping another. And for the first time in a long time, Tom didn't feel like he was making up for the past. He felt like he was building the future,